Hello everyone. On today's video, we're going to take a look at how submersibles and aircraft are used in Victory at Sea. Now, one thing I want to clarify right away is the fact that we're using the basic version of Victory at Sea, not the expanded rules, which takes a lot of this and definitely plays with it compared to what we get. So anyway, our scenario is pretty straightforward today. We have the Ark Royale escorted by the Leander and a pair of Tribal class destroyers. In the opposite corner, we have the Graf Spee, as well as two German destroyers being escorted by some Me-109s. Now, one of the great things, as I was saying earlier about Victory at Sea, is it comes with all these counters, and all I used was the snip tool in Windows while reading the PDF to actually snip out the little pictures so I could go ahead and add them onto the table. So anyway, we're not going to go into the formalities of rolling initiative and all those kind of things. We're just going to kind of go over the general rules of airplanes. So if you're using airplanes, each things like carriers, for example, have a given amount of aircraft flights that they carry. Each flight in this case, varies. In this case, it looks like 4 for the Ferry Fulmars, and it looks like for the Swordfish, we also have 4. But keep in mind, in the real war, there were different sizes of flights and things like that. Now, at the beginning of a movement phase, this is where things get a little interesting. You can choose if you have an aircraft carrier or you have, say, a ship like a cruiser or a battleship that can deploy float planes for observation, you can choose to do that to send 2 flights up at a time. You can also recover 2 flights at a time if you need to. Keep in mind these turns are about 10 minutes long, so that's a little fast, but not terribly fast. So pretending that we won initiative and pretending right now that all I've got is these guys hovering out here, if I wanted to deploy a couple more flights, I could go ahead and do so. When you deploy flights, they should be touching the front arc and the actual chip itself of the thing that deployed them. So in my case, I know I'm going to be launching torpedo bombers, so I'm going to go ahead and pick 2 flights of those guys in the beginning. Okay, now this is where things get a little weird / interesting. When you do aircraft, if there are any aircraft on the field, I should say, over the ocean, in this particular case, although you could easily do a ground battle with just airplanes because the rules are so flexible, these guys are actually going to move after your main ships move. Now, the way that this works is that the person who won initiative gets to decide who moves all of their fighters first, and then that person can move all their fighters. And then you go back and do it again, but this time you can move all your torpedo bombers and dive bombers. It's not in every other situation like it is for ships. So let's pretend for a second that we've moved all our ships and that the German over there have also moved all of their ships. Now we enter the airplane phase. Now the Brits right now have a single set of Fulmars up in the air right now, which is our fighters, and the Germans, of course, have 2 groups of Me-109s. So taking a look at the statistics page real quick, we're going to go ahead and move these. Remember, we're going to be attacking with these later. We're not going to attack during the same turn we move. The Focke-Wulf 190s, but we're interested in Me-109, have a move of 31 inches. In this game, you can use that 31 inches for anything. So in my particular case, I'm just going to take 31 inches and get these guys going probably about here. I don't want to go too far away from the ships that I'm escorting. And then I'm going to go ahead and move my other group of fighters. Again, this is assuming that the Germans chose to go first, or the Americans who won initiative told the Germans to go first. So I'm going to go ahead and move these guys out about that far as well. Okay, perfect. So now it would be turn for the British to go ahead and move their fighters. Now we only have 1 set of airborne fighters, which now that I'm kind of thinking about it, might not have been a very good idea because they're probably going to get whipped pretty bad here. So the speed on the Fulmars is 19 inches. So I don't know if that's going to be quite enough to get. No, it is not. So I'm going to move them up to about right there. Now that's over. So now the next thing that would happen is the Germans would go ahead and move all their bombers. They don't have any bombers, but the British do. So now we get to move these guys. Unfortunately, the Swordfish are kind of slow, and they only have a 13-inch move. So we're going to try to keep them as close to that escorting fighter as possible, because I kind of know what's going to happen next. Again, we're moving these guys just 13 inches. I'm going to try to keep them pretty tight here, and you'll see why in a minute. All right, let's see our turn happen. Everything we're out of range for anti-aircraft. Now, if you were in a situation where you had a shot, such as you're dogfighting or you're shooting a torpedo or dropping a bomb, then you go ahead and decide to do that instead of ordering one of your ships to attack at that moment. Keep in mind, you activate your entire Air Force simultaneously. But at this point, we don't have any of that. So let's say another turn goes by. This time we'll use an actual example. Let's go ahead and see how either side rolls. See, the Germans got 6. The Brits got 4. So the Germans, we get to go first. So we moved all our ships. We've done that already. Again, I guess we're staying in park at this point. We could be zipping around. Realistically, if the Ark Royale was this close to the Graf Spee, he'd be in trouble because that Graf Spee would be coming right down on him despite that escort. He's a pretty good ship. So the Germans are going to choose to move first because they're going to do this. So remember, when you move your aircraft, this is after every other their ships. Now the reason he's going to move first is because of the fact he's going to try to tie up everybody for dogfighting. So I'm going to go ahead and check that distance. That distance is good, but what I'm more interested in doing is zipping by him and then coming over here and engaging the swordfish. I know exactly how this is going to end. So we're going to go ahead and move him as well. He can go ahead and scoot. Remember, it's a 31-inch move. Put him right there. So now it's the British turn. So this is probably not going to end well for our swordfish. But regardless, I'm going to go ahead and take these guys, and you don't have to face them any direction. They can change direction, and I'm going to go ahead and put them touching like this. So now, these two guys and this guy is assumed to be dogfighting. Well, dogfighting, you can't move until one side gets destroyed. These two guys are also dogfighting. Unfortunately, these guys aren't. So now we go ahead and we take a look at what occurs next. So at this point, we go ahead and into our attack phase. Now, if we had any gunnery to do, we could do that. But as the Germans, because we want initiative, we're going to go first, and we're going to say we're going to start our dogfight. So you can only do one dogfight per turn, and you'll see how this plays out. Dogfighting is very straightforward. You simply take a dice for each side. You roll it, and then you add the dogfight score. So in the case of the British, the swordfish, they have a dogfight score of 0, which means the total here is going to be a 5. The Me-109s, their total dogfight score is +4. So this becomes a 7, which means that the swordfish are now going to take a single damage. Since they only have 1 hit point, the swordfish are knocked out of action. So let's go ahead and do that again, this time with the other group. Okay, so this time the swordfish got a 2, which is adjusted to 2 with the dogfight score. These guys got a 4, plus 4 is 8, which also means these swordfish are eliminated. So this isn't so good. Now, since there's no other fighters or bombers doing the thing, the Brits get to go. The Brits are going to say, hey, we're going to go ahead and try to dogfight you back. So we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. So this time the Germans roll a 1, plus 4 is going to give us 5. The Fulmars over here, their dogfight score is actually a +2. So that's a 5 against a 5. It's a tie. So this would mean that they're stuck in a dogfight and have to do this again during the next turn. But let's go ahead and modify things a little bit. Let's say that the British actually were able to score slightly higher. That would eliminate this flight of Me-109s. Going into the next battle, there's a good chance that this kind of a thing would probably happen, because again, he can't really do much damage to a ship. So we'd have a similar kind of thing. Let's see, this time, yeah, that wouldn't have ended well. So these guys would have been destroyed, leaving the Me-109s alone. So let's go ahead and change history here. Let's assume for a second that somehow the Me-109s were vanquished by the superior cap or better radar or something like that, and they were able to actually get to do what they want to do. So let's go ahead and grab, we're going to need a lot of airplanes for this, as you're going to see in a second. Let's go ahead and grab 6 groups of these aircraft. So let's say they got to about here and they're in formation ready to go. Each plane kind of has its own little rule as far as how it works. So before I get into that, let's say at the end of our movement phase and for the British for aircraft, we've gone ahead and gotten them this close to the attack position. At the beginning of the gunnery phase, anybody who's in range with anti-aircraft score can engage any aircraft as long as that aircraft is in dogfighting. So in this case, I left myself a little note here. The Zerstörer has a 5 range. So just taking a quick look, he's actually out of reach. I believe the Graf Spee has a 8 range, which actually might put him in range. No, he's also out of range, so he wouldn't be able to do any AAA fire. So let's say things were a little different and we ended our turn like this. Keep in mind, anti-aircraft fire come before we get to attack with these aircraft, as you'll see in a second. So we have a situation that looks like this. So in this case, the Zerstörer is, I think he's still out of range. No, he's in range. 5R, yeah, we're good. So he's going to choose to attack one of these swordfish. So what he's going to do is he's going to go ahead and roll a d6, and he is going to add his, he's not going to add anything, I'm sorry. Yeah, he's going to roll a d6, which gets a 2. Now, you have to compare that to the target rating of the swordfish. The swordfish has a target of 5, which means the swordfish is not hit by the anti-aircraft fire. This Zerstörer can't actually engage another guy at this point because he's used his only attack dice. You can split him any way, you can shoot at him in the arc. So the Graf Spee over here on the flip side, he gets 2 attack dice. So he's going to attack 2 separate groups. He's going to attack this one and this one. Again, the number we're going for is a 5. So in this case, the Deutschland class, the Graf Spee, was unable to hit either. Last but not least, we're going to see if the Zerstörer can hit this guy in the end. Again, we're looking for a 5 or higher. We didn't get it. Oh, there it is. So that does not mean that this aircraft is destroyed. All aircraft get a dodge. It's sort of like an armor save for those of you who've seen other games like this. He has to roll a 4 or higher to not take the hit. He took a 1, which means that this guy would be eliminated. Let's say, however, he rolled a 5. So that would mean every single one of these aircraft, when it gets to be activated in the gunnery phase, or the attack phase, has the ability to engage. And that's exactly what they're going to do. So since I have quite a few of these, we're going to go ahead and fire a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 individual torpedoes. So we're going to do torpedoes the same way you're used to doing torpedoes if you've saw the other tutorials. We're going to do 2 into him, and we're going to do 2 into him like that. Now keep in mind, these guys are actually stuck here until next turn when they can kind of do the 13-inch move, do something like this, and then they'd probably move like over here, and then they'd be safe, and that would be pretty good for them in that particular turn. Yeah, I got a dice, didn't I? So let's say we reach the end of the attack phase. Again, this wouldn't have happened yet. These guys would still have been stacked up here until they could move during the next turn. So now we have to go ahead and evaluate the torpedo attacks. Torpedo attacks are managed the exact same way as you're probably used to them. The torpedoes just do slightly different damage and have different attack dice from the ship. So according to the Ferry Swordfish, his torpedo has a range of 4, which he was in range for. He has 1 attack dice each. So it looks like we're going to get a total of 6 attack dice. I don't know if that was 6, but we'll find out in a second. Now we have to compare the results of the attack dice. We're going to group these 2 for the top one. We're going to group these 2 for the bottom one. That's why it's really important you keep this pretty straight on the table. Group these 2 for this one. Now you have to compare the attack dice. The only modifier, by the way, for torpedo dice is if you're beaming, which is what we are. So normally the Zerstörer has a target of 6 up, but since the torpedo was shot at his beam, that's his long side here, that becomes a 5 up. Unfortunately, that wasn't a hit. Cough! Oh, yes, it was a hit. Coming down to the Deutschland class, the Graf Spee, he's a 5 up, but he gets reduced to a 4 up because, again, our torpedoes are hitting the beam, which means we got another hit. Coming down here, he's also a 6 up, but he's reduced to a 5 up because we're hitting the beam with the torpedoes, so unfortunately there's no hits there. Now, each torpedo hit has a damage dice of 4, so we need to evaluate how much damage that particular hit costs. We'll go ahead and do it separately this time. Alright, so now we have a 6 and a 4 against his armor rating of 2 up. That means we get 2 hits, which is actually almost enough to completely destroy the destroyer. But as an added bonus, we might actually have gotten a critical. That was a critical. So again, to do criticals, you just take the 2 dice and roll them together and see what you get. That is a 9. That is a secondary armament hit on the Zerstörer, which is pretty effective. He's also a crippled status. Coming down for the Graf Spee here, again, we only got 1 torpedo hit, which means we get to roll 4 dice to see how much it does. Different torpedoes do different amounts of damage dice. The armor rating on the Graf Spee is a 3 up, so we need 3 as a greater. 1, 2, 3, 4. That was a really good hit. Possibility for 2 criticals. Let's see what happens. 1 critical confirmed. Let's see what the critical actually does. And that's a 6, so that's an engine hit. As far as what actual part of the engine, again, I'm doing this from memory. I think that's propeller. That might also be engine room. So that was actually a really, really good hit. It would have slowed him down considerably until he was able to fix it in an end phase. So that's it basically for aircraft. By the way, if you're going to be doing a bombing run, I don't have any bombers with me at the moment. But if you were going to do bombers, I believe there's more in the expansion pack, you have to have the aircraft end its turn touching the thing you're going to be bombing. And then you just roll the attack dice as normal. There's no special bonus or anything along those lines. The only difference with dive bombers and with torpedo bombers, however, and this is one of those things I should have mentioned a little bit earlier, is they actually get a special bonus or penalty to actually be hit by AAA. Taking a look at this really quickly here, just to double check to make sure I'm not missing anything like this. Let's see. If an aircraft is noted as being a bomber, a -1 penalty is applied to the attack dice because it's just more difficult. Dive bombers, while avoiding this penalty, are much easier for anti-aircraft fire to track. So whenever you're making a dive bombing attack, everybody gets a +1 on its attack dice to attack it with AAA, assuming it's the victim of the dive bombing run. So that's definitely something you want to kind of keep an eye out for. But again, that's pretty straightforward. And again, that wasn't too bad of a situation. In some other systems for naval miniatures combat, that's a lot more complicated process. So I actually kind of like the way they do it. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put these guys away, because now it's time to talk about submarines, or submersibles as it likes to call them. So I'm going to go ahead and pull these guys out like this. I'm going to go ahead and I'll leave them over here and kind of have them enjoy their little fun time here. Now, submersibles are handled, I don't want to call it simply. I want to say they're relatively easy to do. So what you're supposed to do with a submarine engagement is you're supposed to divide the table up into 24 grid squares, and then write on a piece of paper, flip it upside down obviously, where your submarine is. Now, this is interesting because at any time at the beginning of a movement phase, you can flip this sucker over and say, haha, my submarine's right here. It's based on this grid location. You can already see how this is starting to get complicated. However, there's always a freak chance that if you have a destroyer with the sub-hunter keyword, that it can detect any submarine in the same grid square as it is with a roll of 6 or greater. So, for example, if he was over here, he grabbed his dice and then went ahead and rolled it, and he got a detection of 6, that would mean any submarines in his square would suddenly be revealed. Of course, if he gets a 6 and no submarine shows up, that's a safe bet there's no submarine in that specific grid square. So anyway, let's go ahead and see what happens. So I did this at the beginning of the game. I'm going to go ahead and flip it over. So my U-boat location is 35 inches from the bottom, 12 inches from the left. So if I recall correctly, 35 inches from the bottom, 12 inches from the left, puts him right here. Now, if this were the beginning of a movement phase, you can declare him as being on the surface, in which case he gets to use his little 3-inch or 4-inch or 5-inch gun, plus his torpedoes, or you can say he's submerged, which is going to make him go a little bit slower. So I'm actually going to say that he is submerged. Now, when we move to the attack phase, he can't use deck gun, obviously, when he's underwater. It wouldn't work very well. The crew would drown. But he can still use torpedoes as normal. Now, but the particular submarine that I just brought in here, this is a Type 7 submarine. This is pretty much everybody knows this one. It has 4 torpedoes of range 10 and 2 attack dice. So let's say the Germans won initiative. We went ahead and got this guy. Obviously, the bigger fish to fry would be the aircraft carrier, but I don't really have a good spot to hit him with. So I'm going to go for it anyway. Submarines are extremely agile. They have the agile trait, and I believe this particular submarine has turning of 3, which means if you're using the little turning guide, this guy, he can actually move 3 of these, but since he has the agile trait, he can turn, move a little bit, and then turn again, which makes him very touchy. The problem is that when he's submerged, he only gets a speed of 1 inch, so he can only move about that far, which is not going to do him much. So he's probably going to go for the Leander after moving. Okay, so let's say he wants to attack. First off, the torpedo has to be in the correct arc. In this case, just looking at it kind of from the center like this, yeah, we're in the correct arc. All right, hitting the beam, that's debatable. I mean, I could get out a protractor and measure that angle pretty accurately to see if it's within the 60 degrees off of this. But we're going to say it's beaming anyway. So the German submarine, the U-boat, chooses to fire a torpedo. So we go ahead and do our normal attack phase. Everything happens, you know. We get to the end of the attack phase. Everyone's done their gunnery. These destroyers didn't have a shot on the submarine as to detect it anyway. And we hit ourselves in this situation. We go ahead and roll his attack dice. I believe for this particular submarine, he gets 2 attack dice. And we're rolling against a 5, I believe, for the Leander. I'll check. Yeah, we're rolling for a 5. So we got 1 hit. So one of our 2 torpedoes that we launched from the front did connect. Let's take a look. Our damage, we get 3. Oh, that's quite a bit. So we get 3. So the total damage here, again, we have to beat an armor rating of 3 up. I think it is. Yep, 3 up. We do 1 damage and there's no critical. So that was, you know, he got dinged with a torpedo. Keep in mind, some ships have what they call the torpedo belt as a special keyword. That just makes them you have to subtract 1 from the damage roll. It's nothing big. So we dinged him up a little bit. So we move up to the next turn, and now these two tribal class destroyers are like, oh, it's our turn to do what we do best. Now, depth charging is a little tricky because in order to actually go ahead and depth charge him, you have to, quote, detect the submarine. Even though we know he's out there, we don't actually have a good lock on him. We just know he's in here. We especially would know he's in here because the Leander just took a hit. So the tribal destroyers have to get this submerged submarine detected. So to do that, you simply roll one dice, and for any submarine that is within 8 inches, of, I should say, destroyer within 8 inches of it. If the dice is a 4 or higher, everybody detects it. If you have the sub-hunter trait, you get to subtract 1, so it's a 3-up. So the two tribals, I don't think they have the sub-hunter trait. I'm actually going to confirm that real quick before I say something stupid. They do not have the sub-hunter trait, so it's a 4-up. So for this guy, he gets a 3, and for this guy, he gets a 4-up, which means everybody knows where he is and he can be attacked this turn. So let's say it's the movement phase. The Germans go first. He's not stupid, so he's going to move an inch closer for some silly reason. Then the British get to go, and they're like, aha, we're going to attack you right through. So we're going to go scoot right over the top of him. And then let's say that this guy was actually at this angle, and he scoots over the top of him also, to put these two guys, the submerged target, which we did detect, in the rear arc. Now we get to attack them with depth charges. Different types of ships have different numbers of depth charges and different attack dice for depth charges. In our particular case, our depth charges, we have an attack dice of 4 and a damage dice of 2. So that's a lot. So we're going to get a total of 8 dice on this guy. I believe a submarine, however, I believe the Type 7, if I recall correctly, has a target of 6 up. So we get 8 dice. We have to get at least 1 6 up if that's possible. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Keep in mind I'm rolling for both tribals attacking. All right here. So it looks like we have 2 hits. So the damage dice on this particular style depth charge is 4. So we get 8 damage dice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The U-boat, I'm going to go ahead and check that real quick. His damage score is he has 2 armor. And I don't think he has more than 3 hit points, so this will be pretty messy. Yeah, okay, yeah. I don't even need to add that up to realize that Type 7 is now sitting at the bottom on fire. It's 3 damage, by the way. 1 cripples him. A crippled sub, by the way, must surface. So we went ahead and did that. Let's say for some reason that after doing this crazy attack, we only got 2, which crippled him. So that would mean next turn he has to surface. So you go ahead and poke his head out like this, and of course that would mean everybody gets a free hit on this guy. But that's about it as far as submarines go. There's a couple of the little nitty-gritty things which you can read in the book, but generally I find them pretty easy to use. One thing to watch out for is the torpedoes themselves are slow loading, so in the event that he fired his forward torpedoes, he can fire his back this turn, but he wouldn't be able to fire his forward torpedoes again until the following turn. Aircraft, of course, have the ability to attack him when he's on the surface, but when he's underwater, he can't be detected. So anyway, hopefully you guys found that entertaining and enjoyable. Maybe I'll run a scenario a little later on where we use like submarines attacking a convoy, but until then, enjoy.